All right, class. So I think this week I'm going to spare you the death by PowerPoint, hopefully, and cover some of the control structures that we've covered over the last couple of weeks and in the material this week. So make sure that you read the information in the books 24/7 as well as the modules, and make sure as you're going through the modules that you use those exercises that are available in the modules, and a lot of those really provide a visual display on how a lot of the control structures work. So let's take a look at our code, and now this is not code that's going to do any specific thing. This just kind of demonstrates the control structures that we've covered over the last couple of weeks and this week. So first and foremost, notice that we are usually using a modular design. We have a main module and then sub-modules beneath it. So make sure for all the assignments that you turn in from this point forward that you have a modular design. You will have a main module such as this, and then it's gonna end the main module, and then you're gonna have submodules with the proper heading below that. So let's take a look at what's going on here. So I am declaring a string module called my name, and then I'm calling a selection demonstration, I'm sorry, call selection demo module at this line. So the processing leaves this part of the code and goes down to the selection module to execute any code that's inside this selection demo module. So the very first line of execution declares a variable, a character variable called case choice. Now, I want to make very clear, I've stated to a few people in the class that all of the variables need to be basically needed to be declared in one area, and that's preferably at the beginning of the main module. Now, there are some exceptions to this. In this case, we're declaring a character module that will declaring a case choice variable as character that will only be used in this module. So as we go down, we make sure we give the user very clear instructions, and again, it's very important to make sure that you, as you're writing your code, that you look at your code from both sides of the code. So you'll be writing your code to execute or to achieve a certain task, but make sure that you also look at your code from the user's perspective to make sure that that user has all the information that they need to provide input to that code. So at any rate, we declare our case choice variable as a character, which again, a character variable will only accept a single character, and then we provide instruction out to the user saying please input your name, and the next line is an input statement, and that input statement will wait for the user to enter some string and press return. Now notice that my name was declared up in main, and we're using it down here. Now we'll see later that this type of code, this type of processes on variables is only possible when we're using a modular design such as this. Now when we have sub-programs, it's going to be a little different, and we'll see that later. So at any rate, the user has entered some string of characters that is hopefully their name, and it's going to go down to the next line of execution, and it's an if-then-else statement. And so this says if, and it tests the contents of the variable called my name to see if it is equal to Tony. Now notice that we have a double equal sign to test the contents of that variable against whatever string that we're using as a test condition. Now if we were to use a single equal sign, the code would try to put that string Tony into the myName variable. So make sure when you're doing a test condition that it's the double equal sign. So it tests if it is equal to Tony. If it is, then it's going to enter this piece of the code and write to the user, write to the display, my name is, and print the output, put the contents of my name, which is going to be Tony. Now, if it's something other than Tony, then it's going to go down to the else statement and execute the guts of that portion of the if-then else statement. And it's going to print out to the display, your name is not Tony. And it's going to end that if statement. So then, and now these, again, you'll notice that these are this is a selection demonstration. So these are all selection control structures. Now, another type of selection control structure is a case statement, which hopefully you guys used in your assignment 2. So I've got a very clear output going to the user that gives basically a menu of choices for the user to analyze, and then this line says choose your favorite beer. And then again, the input statement will wait for the user to enter some value. Now, I probably should have changed this a little bit, made it even more clear, and use A, B, or C to make sure that's very clear. Now, so the user enters some option A, B, or C, and then it goes into the case statement. Now, again, we use a case statement when we're trying to choose between more than 2 options. So if there are only 2 options, then we can use an if then else statement. Now, there were some students that used if then statements. There was just a series of if then statements. And that's cool. That's okay. But just understand that creates a little bit more processing time for the processor, and it's a little less efficient than using a case statement. So the user enters his input A, B, or C, and then it goes down to these inside the case statement. And if the contents of case choice is A, then it writes out to the display your favorite beer is Fat Tire. If it's B, it displays your favorite beer is Milk Stout. And if it's C, it displays out to the user your favorite beer is Mass Transit. And then if they enter something other than A, B, or C, it displays what, you don't like beer. So get familiar with that, with the case statement, how that case statement is used, and we may be seeing that again later on in the class. So, and that is the end of that selection demo module. And when that module ends, notice that it goes back up to this location and executes the next line of code, which is to call the loop demo module, which goes down here and declares a few variables. Count is integer, in count is integer, and out count is integer. Now, I want to make a quick point on these variables and the case choice variable that we declared up here. Now, notice that they are being declared inside that module. Now, in this first module, the selection demo module, the case choice variable is declared in that module and remains active until it exits that module and goes back up to main. When it exits that module, that variable no longer exists. That piece of memory is freed up and the value is gone. So, in other words, you can't declare a variable inside a submodule and then try to access that same variable later on in another submodule. So, and now that is, there are global variables and local variables, and variables that are declared in main are considered global. That means that they are accessible by all modules to include main and all the submodules beneath main. All variables that are declared in the submodules are local modules. They are local to that submodule and are only in existence during the life of that submodule. Okay, so back to the loop demo module. So we declare three variables: count, in count, and out count as integer. So the text and the online modules talk about a few different types of loop structures, and they all have different uses. So it's rather important to understand how these guys work, and so you can know when to use them in your code. So with a do while, it has a do while and a test condition, and this should be count. And now notice that we have count set to 0, so it's going to do while count is less than or equal to 10. So it is indeed less than 10, so it's going to go in here and it's going to increment count by 1 and then write the contents of count. So effectively what that is going to do is display 1 through 10 and then exit the do while loop, and then you'll have the end do at the end of that do while. And the repeat until is very similar. However, notice that the test condition is down here at the bottom of that control structure. So that means that this loop will enter regardless of what the value of count is. So if count is already equal to 0, it's going to execute the guts of this control structure one time and then say, oh well, count is equal to 0, so I'm going to go on down to the next line of code. Alright, so I've talked about the for loop before, so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this again, but it's very important to understand that inside the for loop there are 3 segments. The first segment sets the value to that variable. The middle segment is the test condition, and it tests whether the contents of the variable is equal to that test condition, and then the last segment does make some change to that variable. In this case, it increments the variable by 1, which is what count plus plus does. So of course, count is going to equal count equals 0, so we're going to write count, and then it's going to go back and increment count. Now notice this, it's very important that you understand this. When it first enters the for loop, it sets the variable to whatever value you have here. In this case, it's going to set count equal to 0. It's going to test whether count is equal to 10, and this should be less than or equal to 10. Sorry about that. And then when it does this test condition, it's going to execute the guts of that for loop and then increment the variable by 1. So make sure that you understand the order of that sequence. So it'll go through and increment this 10 times, and it's going to do the same thing. It's going to output the contents of count 10 times, or actually 11 times in this case, since we start at 0, and then it's going to exit that for loop. So now one important factor that we need to consider, especially in some of the material from this week, is that we can nest a lot of these control structures. So I wanted to show you how a nested for loop would work, because that might be useful to you a little later on. I want you to see how this works. So we come to this for loop, and now we have out count that is declared up here, in count and out count that are declared up there at the top of this module. So the value of out count is set to 0, and it's tested to see if out count is less than 5, and at that point it is less than 5, so it goes inside the guts of that for loop, and you'll see that it enters another for loop, and it sets the variable in count to 0 and tests to see if in count is less than 5, and it is. So it goes inside the guts of this the inner loop, and it displays to the user the word out and the contents of the out count variable, which is 0. Let's change this to 1 or 1, and change this to 1, and change this to equal to and equal to. So now notice what I did. If we had this set to 0, both of these set to 0, and this set to less than 5, each one of these for loops will increment 5 times. But I want to that first number I want to print out needs to be 1, so we're going to set both of those variables to 1. And notice that I set this test condition to less than or equal to. So that means that if we're set to 0 or whatever value, and if it was just less than, when that variable turned to 5, it would not execute the guts. It would execute out, and it would only print the 4 and not the 5. So in any event, so we're inside this inner loop. So we set the in count variable to 1 and test to see if it's less than or equal to 5, and it is. So we go to the guts of that inner for loop, and it outputs out and the contents of the out count variable, and displays in and the contents of the in count variable. So it does that, and then exits or goes to the bottom of the for loop and increments the in count variable by 1, and then it goes back up here and tests to see if that's less than 5, and it is. So it goes back down here and executes this line of code, which displays the same information, but notice that out count is still the same, it's still at 1, but now in count is 2. So and it does this a third time, and out count is still 1, in count is 3, and then 4, and then 5. And then when out count is 5, it executes that line of code and then increments in count by 1, which makes it 6. And it goes to this test condition and says, is in count less than or equal to 5? And it is not. So it exits the inner loop and goes to this line of code, which simply produces a new line character, and the display goes down to the next line. Now notice what happens. So we get down to the bottom of the outer for loop, and we have to go back up. It increments out count by 1, and it goes back up to the top and tests whether out count is less than or equal to 5, and that value now is 2. So it is indeed less than 5. So it goes back in to execute the guts of that outer loop. Now notice what happens. We enter this inner loop again, this inner for loop, and now when it executes this for loop for the second time, it's like it never executed it before. So it sets in count back to 1 and tests whether it's less than 5, and then executes this line of code. And now notice that it will print out and the contents of out count, which is now 2. And then in count is 1 again, and then it'll loop through there 5 times, and again on each of the 5 iterations, out count is going to be 2, and in count is going to increment by 1 until it reaches 6, and that's going to be greater than 5. So it's going to exit, print a new line character, and reach the end of the for loop. Go back. It's going to increment in count by 1. Go back up and test to see if out count is less than 5, and it is. So it goes back into the guts of the outer for loop and reaches the inner for loop. And again, when it reaches this inner for loop, the in count variable is once again set back to 1, and it executes the guts of that inner loop 5 times, and so on and so forth. So let's take a quick look at what that output is going to look like. So we'll have out equals 1, in equals 1, out equals 1, in equals 2. Let's see if we can get a better look at how that is set up. So notice on the first time we enter this for loop, the outer for loop, count is equal to 1, and it tests to see if out count is less than equal to 1, and it is, so it enters the for loop. So in count equals 1, and it tests to see if in count is less than equal to 5, and it is. So it says write out and the contents of out count in and the contents of in count. So both of those are 1. So, and then when it exits the and it does that 5 times, so each time the in count variable will increment by 1 until it reaches 5, and then when it reaches 6, it's going to exit that for loop and produce that new line character, which is right here. It's going to go down to this next line, and it's going to reach the top of that outer loop and increment out count by 1, which is going to make that 2. And when it gets back inside, the in count variable is going to be 1 again, and it's going to keep doing that until we get down here to the bottom. Actually, when out count is equal to 5, it's going to execute everything, get down here to the bottom of that for loop, is going to increment out count by 1, making that 6, and do this test condition saying is out count less than equal to 5, and it is not. So then it's going to end that for loop. So hopefully that clears up some information on some of our control structures. I think I've covered most of the material for this week, but I wanted to stress the modular design that we need to have in our code, as well as the syntax, the documentation. Now I've got lots and lots of documentation to explain what's going on in this code, as well as the declaration of the variables and the difference between the global variables and the internal variables, the different control structures that we'll be using, the if then else statements, case statements, and the different types of loops, and so on and so forth. So again, if you guys have any questions about any of that, let me know. Otherwise, you guys have a good week.